1968, 1969, 1970. I'm out of toes and fingers. What else can I count with?
I tell you, but there's kids around.
I was talking about his tail.
See, all you goobers thought that this was just a humble little dick joke they threw in a kid's movie. No, it's actually a Groucho Marx reference. Comedy is fucking back. Mainstream American animation is an extremely demoralizing experience to watch and participate in. So the very few times we find something, a little diamond in the rough, one sparkle of hope in this vast wasteland, we have to give credit where credit is due. And today, it is due to none other than Adam Sandler.
Adam Sandler.
How could the Sandman do this? He beat out a Disney film. That's just incredible. It's a great underdog story. This is Davy and Goliath in real time. You are seeing the proliferation of the new Sandler Nation in animation. Domination. Did y'all hear about this Family Guy shit? But if you didn't already know, Happy Madison Productions has released their first animated film since 8 Crazy Nights, a Netflix original aptly titled Leo. It's about this 74-year-old lizard that realizes that his life is ending sooner than he thought, and in order to make the most out of his finite time on Earth, he ends up coaching the kids in his class through all of their problems and their worries, and, you know, as far as I can tell, this is a fully original concept. It wasn't an adaptation of a book or a comic or whatever. It was an idea since the mid-2010s was announced in 2016. But the actual idea, I think, was kept vague up until recently. I saw the trailer and I was like, oh, this kind of looks interesting. I might want to look at that. And imagine my lack of surprise when the final product ended up being pretty satisfying. This shit kind of had me in a chokehold for a moment. I went on a ride, a spirit journey. I was kind of teared up by the end of that shit. That almost never happens. Your cinema. The main thing that works in this movie's favor is how flagrantly it defies expectation. You know, the bar was pretty low. It's a Happy Madison production. Adam Sandler's doing an annoying voice for this lizard. Bill Burr is acting opposite to him. He's pretty good. But everyone knows how these shits normally go down, so you kinda gotta walk in with an open mind. But it doesn't take too long for you to discover it looks nice, it feels nice, the story is pretty functional. These characters, for as 1.5 dimensional as they are, you know, they work within the context of the story. The songs are basic bitch comedy songs, but there's quite a few that actually had some foundational heft to them. If they were kind of cleaned up a bit, there's a couple that I think would actually be solid bangers. Inherently, it is a feel-good story between Leo and this classroom of kids. Generally, we come to know him as a selfless, relatively principled individual. He's been chilling in a tank for like 8 decades, and despite the fact that he was originally meant to escape and live a real life before he dies, he's able to find fulfillment in helping the people around him pretty quickly. It's interesting because by the end of the second act, I think beginning of third, they also shove in this liar reveal twist. I know, it's the cardinal sin of animation. It's a little less annoying here. Though I'd say it definitely gets kind of clunky by the 2/3 mark. There's just a lot going on. A little too complicated. I think it's the only real criticism that I have, and the reason for that is because it gets in the way of it being a feel-good saga. That is essentially what Leo is. That is its greatest strength. That is what it was made to be, and nothing more. And sometimes, that's quite refreshing, you know? Everything else you could say about it is just kind of pedantic. Like, the jokes are very crude. Yes, I do believe those are endemic to Adam Sandler films. The comedy songs are annoying. Well, sometimes they are, but they're generally pretty brief. And also, they're comedy songs. It's not exactly an Alan Menken joint. so I didn't expect that going in.
I said I get it! I know I said I get it again. I'm sorry. It's just that last one wasn't even the rhyme, it was a repeat.
The animation is not Pixar level quality. No shit. You know what else isn't Pixar or Disney level quality? Every other animated film in existence, including their recent ones. That's not a real criticism. Whether out of utility or plain corporate greed, the folks that put together these cartoons often find themselves working with much less in shorter amounts of time. So it's always admirable when you see an underdog type story rise up out of the ashes. Leo wasn't exactly built up to be one, but I guess I would consider it now an underrated classic. Just eyeballing the film, I'm guessing that its budget has to be within the range of 20 and 50 million. That's still a pretty big range. Generally speaking, it's not uncommon for whole feature films to be built on like the third of a Disney level budget, especially if they're Netflix originals. They don't release consistent figures, but I did track down a few numbers to kind of substantiate this. Wendell and Wild was made on about 60 mil. Pinocchio was made on 35 million. Klaus, the soulful masterpiece that it is, was made on merely $40 million, within a full 2D pipeline, balancing CG and effects and everything else, 40 million flat. The studio responsible for animation production has quite consistently been a juggernaut within the industry for the past 3-4 decades or so. They worked on The Matrix, they worked on the Harry Potter films, they worked on Happy Feet. They're pretty consistently a presence on modern Marvel films. So this is entirely an issue with its budget. And yes, it could look better in theory, you know, if they were given a little more scratch. But it really genuinely does not matter in the grand scheme of things. There have been worse looking epics, to be honest with you.
Bulletproof.
But back to the film. Certain expectations of names or figures or entities can sometimes get in the way of us challenging something on an objective level. Sometimes a reputation precedes them. That's not to say historical precedents should never be taken into account, especially within criticism. It is a very important tool, within reason, of course. Part of the reason why there are now 9,000 video essays circulating about how DreamWorks or Sony Pictures Animation are mocking Disney for all they're worth, and giving them swirlies in the bathroom, is because the expectations were definitely lower for them than they would be for Disney, at least on a brand-to-brand level. Generally, I'd say DreamWorks has significantly more of a positive association than negative, but Sony Pictures almost certainly was seen as yesterday's news, today's trash, bold and brash, fresh on the rehash. Still got it. Like, DreamWorks had The Boss Baby, and Abominable, and maybe Trolls or The Croods, depending on who you ask. But they also had Captain Underpants, and new iterations of Shrek and How to Train Your Dragon and Kung Fu Panda. Sony Pictures Animation. I mean, it's looking, you know. Well, I liked Open Season as a kid, I mean.
Yeah! No! That's a Freddy Fazbear right there!
I don't blame anyone for soy-facing over them when the studio that brought us the Emoji Movie 2 years later can deliver such heat in small packages. I think most people are cognizant to the general dogma that anyone can cook, and that great media can come from anyone, anywhere, at any time. But I don't really blame them for thinking it wouldn't be coming from these two guys, at least within the recent future. And while these newer films in their respective filmographies tend to win people over on a sliding scale of decent to Kino, it's also partially just because the expectations were lower. If I told you that Genndy Tartakovsky was putting together a new action-adventure, high fantasy, sci-fi, horror epic with hookers and blackjack, you'd probably be shitting yourself. You'd probably be so excited. And if it were mid, if you forgot that it existed, like 2 months after it finished. Okay, maybe it's a fluke. Maybe. If I told you he was making a story about a dog that's gonna lose his balls in 12 hours, you might have some reservations, some hesitations on where you should even begin. You might be past dipping your toes in, but you're not really past diving in. If you make an anniversary film and market it as the culmination of everything you've done, a celebration of one of the most powerful brands in your arsenal, and it turns out to be kinda mid, how do you think the people will respond to that? Obviously, there's a bit of a bias there, but it's one of your own creation. Managing expectations is a part of the job. Making sure that consumers know what you are and what you're about, who you have in your arsenal, and what values you espouse, while also not giving them the world, preparing for situations akin to Sausage Party or Spider-Verse. Just making sure that everything is good on the home front, so nothing blows up in your face like 2 months after the award nomination. All of that's important. Managing expectations is just as important for studios as it would be for regular people. Like, there's nothing wrong with 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10 movies. Nobody inherently has an issue with those. But it falls damn well short of the expectation that this is the celebration of everything you've done. This is the peak of the Princess brand. These posts are fucking hilarious, but they're also kind of sad. It's hilarious that we're even trying to have these conversations, because it really is not that deep. If you promise live action remake of Lion movie, and you get live action remake of Lion movie, you've done your job. If you promise expansive sequel on previous Juggernaut, and you deliver expansive sequel on previous Juggernaut, you've done your job. If you promise 100-year anniversary epic, and you give us Wish, you fell below expectation. You did not do your job. You should not expect people to line up to a theater, a physical theater, and shell out so much money to see something that fell below their expectation. They're not getting their money's worth. It has nothing to do with personal feelings. If it were a 9 out of 10, people would be lining up for it. And that applies on a global scale too. Just because a film falls below expectation in our part of the world, it doesn't mean it would necessarily fare the same somewhere else. That is exactly why Elemental was able to pick it up and get it together. If memory serves, I think the South Korean box office supplied literally like 10% of its total gross. Total gross! Now, is timing a factor? Absolutely. Can bad timing be unfair to a film that would normally do better? Absolutely. I don't think it really applies here. Though I will say, whichever journo grabbed this quote from Iger at this specific time probably deserves a little Christmas bonus. That is just peak. So to sum up, I think managing expectations is good. I think there's a difference between pieces of media that you have to adjust the lens through which you judge it, and pieces of media that are just not delivering on what they promised. Saying that your new favorite cartoon is comfy could carry like 5 or 6 different definitions depending on the context. But it really is an important part of the viewing experience to just walk in with the right idea in mind. It's not really your job to suspend your disbelief, but it is your job to try and be reasonable, especially if you're a critic. I didn't have much to say beyond that. I had no ulterior motive. I just found that these 2 films were great examples to make this point with. But this applies on a generalized scale, so it's something to keep in mind for the future. Go check out Leo. It's sitting on Netflix. I don't necessarily agree with Man, but his review was pretty decent. Should be able to set your expectations at a reasonable level. I do wish for us to have something more than this, but I don't know when it's coming, which is not much different from any other time of year at this point. Keep the faith. Things will eventually happen.